Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about the components that make up our 3D meshes or 3D geometry inside of MODO and how we can select and modify those components. First thing I'm going to do here is in a new scene, I'm going to hold down my shift key and click on this sphere to add a sphere. And you'll notice that the highlighted object here has kind of three things, right? It has these points or vertices where these edges are connecting. Then within those edges we have these surfaces or faces or polygons. Some have 4 sides here, some have 3 sides here, but they're all gonna be called polygons or faces in any 3D package. Just a note here that the points might not be visible to you by default, so you might want to go to the options menu by clicking the O key and then just turning on show vertices to always under the active meshes tab. I also increased the point size by turning on independent point size just to make them a little bit more visible. Okay, so as I said here, we have a couple of different components. One is these vertices, two are these edges, and three are the faces that are made up by those edges and vertices. All right. So to select them in MODO by default, you're going to use your 1, 2, and 3 key, or you can click up here where it says vertex, edge, or polygon. And if I select vertex and I just click and drag, you'll see I can select a bunch of stuff. Now here, if I hold down shift, I can add to my selection. If I hold down control, I can remove my selection just by mousing over. And that could be a little bit difficult with points, but if you get close enough to the point, it will toggle for you. Same thing for edges. If I hold down shift, I can add to my selection, and if I hold down control, I can get rid of something from my selection. And the same thing with polygons. If I hold down, click and drag, I can select a bunch. Then if I need to add to my selection, I can shift click. I can also control click to remove, right? And that's fine and all, but we want to have a little bit more control over how we select things and what we select. So I'm going to show you a couple of tricks here. Alright, so let's first look at some selection tools that work for any of these modes. 1, vertices, 2, edges, or 3, polygons. So the most obvious one is a range selection, which is done by right-clicking and selecting. So you can see in polygon mode it selected all that. If I was to do this kind of here, you'll notice that it will only accept the polygon if the entire polygon is within the range. For edges, it's the same thing. So if the entire edge is encompassed within the range, it will add it. And for vertices, since they don't really take up space, it's either inside or outside of your range. A couple of things about the range selection. First of all, I'm not a huge fan of the lasso style range selection, so I right click and go to lasso style rectangle, and that will kind of give me more of this selection method that I'm used to. You can also get that from the select menu, lasso style rectangle. Second thing to know about the range selection is that it can be a little wonky when you're first starting out. By default, if I do a range selection, let's actually do this in polygon mode, so I'm going to hit 3 and draw across. It's only going to select whatever's facing the camera. That isn't really dependent on some setting, it's really dependent on what shading style you're looking at your scene in. So for example, in the perspective view by default, my shading style is set to default and I can't see through the object, so MODO is assigning the right click to a range selection that will only select what's facing me. However, if I was to go to a wireframe view and then do a right click and select, it's going to select through the entire object. This also means that by default in these other views, like the right front and top, a right click will select through to both sides of the object. If I go back to default here and then I right click and drag, you'll see it only selects one side. The middle click, meaning clicking down on the mouse wheel, will do the opposite. So in the case of a shaded viewport like this, a middle click and drag will select through the entire object, versus in a wireframe view like this, a middle click and drag will only select the side that's facing you, right? You can kind of think of it as right clicking is just so much more easier and natural that they kind of just rely on that. But in case you don't want to go into another view, there is the middle click to kind of do the alternative or the opposite of the right click, right? So let's full screen this guy again. And let's talk a little bit about some other selection tools we have. So the easiest one is if you select a polygon or a vertex or an edge, the up and down, or sorry, the shift up and down keys will grow or shrink your selection. So if I select this polygon, press shift and up on my keyboard or shift and down on my keyboard, it's going to grow and shrink that selection. Again, same thing works for points and edges. The next thing we want to know about is a ring selection. Now, ring selections can be a little bit finicky. So for edges, it's really easy. If you just double click on an edge, it's going to find every edge that is parallel and connected to the current edge. So it's going to go here, 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 and just all the way around. If it couldn't find another edge for some reason, like if I was to delete that one, which I just did by selecting and hitting the delete key, it's going to select as far as it can, right? It's not going to add that edge in, it's just going to select that for you. Okay. In vertex and in polygon mode, however, double clicking will actually just select anything that's connected to the object that you, or to the polygon or vertex that you're picking. For example, if I was to grab this entire row of polygons, like that, and delete it, then I'm going to double click on the bottom and you'll see it just connects, it selects everything that's connected. This is also sometimes called an island selection. And same thing up here. For vertex mode, if I double click, it will select anything that's connected to the vertex that I'm double clicking on. Right? So we also have a way of selecting an island by using hotkeys. So if I was to select, let's say, that polygon, and I use this closed square bracket button on my keyboard, it's going to select the rest of that island. If I do that down here, it's going to select all of the vertices on that island, and this also works for edges. So, you know, for edges we can double click, but for if we want to just select everything, and you'll notice I don't have anything selected, so it's giving me an error message. But if I was to just select an edge and click that closed bracket, it's going to select everything on that island. The open bracket, however, is going to invert your selection, and it's not going to limit you to a specific island. So if I hit that, it's going to select everything else. It's a little bit easier to see with polygons, so if I have that selected, invert my selection back. Sometimes it's just easier to select what you don't want than to select everything, so that does the trick for you. Another option that we have here that's attached to the keyboard is a loop selection. So to define a loop, you need to at least have two of a component selected. So for edges, again, it's easy because you can just double click, but for polygons, let's say I wanted a loop, I need to tell the program, do I want to loop this way or do I want to loop this way, right? So if I select two polygons, and that second selection is going to define a direction for it to loop in, and now I just want to press the L key for loop, and it's going to make that selection. Similarly, if I selected these two and hit L, it's going to make that selection. Now you can use this for edges as well. L key, but it's just easier to double click, honestly. Again, you can use this for vertices as well. So you'll notice here I have a space between them and it's not going to work. But if I select two that are side by side and hit the L key, it will work. If I select this way, it'll work. And you'll notice I selected this one and then this one, but it selected the entire loop regardless of which side, right? And it did not select anything on this top section because there's actually no connection there. We can also do a pattern selection. So let's say I wanted to get every other polygon in a loop. I can select one and then let's skip to and shift click on this one. And that's going to define a pattern. Now at this point I just want the up key, the up arrow by itself without shift, because shift will grow our selection. So that essentially selected in that pattern saying skip to, right? If I was to do shift up right now, you'll see it grows my selection. Shift down is now not going back to that original selection because it doesn't know to shrink apart from each other, but that's okay. Again, let's just take a look at this with vertices. So pick one, skip one, pick one. The up key will keep looping that around. And edges as well. Pick one, skip one. Right. Just kind of helps you select things quicker. The next option that I want to show here is that we can actually make a selection and then we can convert that selection to a different type or a different component. So I have these polygons selected, and if I hold down my Alt key, you'll notice that these three buttons here become convert buttons instead of vertex, edge, polygon. Holding down Alt makes them convert to vertices, convert to edges, or convert to polygons. And I can still use the 1, 2, and 3 keys, so Alt 1, Alt 2, and Alt 3. So Alt and clicking on that will convert my selection to all the vertices that were touching those polygons. If I was to hit Control Z, I can undo that. If I do Alt and 2, it's going to convert my selection to all these edges, and Alt 3 will convert them back to polygons. So just to see that here as well, Alt 1, vertices, Alt 2, edges, Alt 3, polygons. So I should mention that you can, to some extent, use these tools together. So for example, if I was to select an edge here and then shift click on this edge to define a pattern, then use the up key to select those edges, then press the L key, I get all of those loops together. I can also, of course, just double click on one and double click on the other while holding down shift. I can do a loop selection like that and then hold down the shift key and add edges to this, but you'll notice that the moment I did that, it automatically selected the rest of those edges, so I lost that pattern. So you do want to be careful with some of these. If I try that the other way around, let's say I double click on this, then I select this pattern, shift click, and then hit the up button, that's going to give me what I wanted rather than doing it the other way around. So sometimes you do have to play around with it, but usually, you know, these tools will get you where you need to be. So now that you have ways to select these components, what can we really do with them? Well, we're going to start off very simple with just the tools that we already have, the move, scale, and rotate tools. So let me start a new scene here. And I'm going to throw in a toroid shape, press Shift and A to frame it up. And I'm going to select a couple of polygons here. That. And I'm just going to use my move, rotate, and scale tools. So remember, they're attached to the W, E, and R keys respectively. So first I'm just gonna move these up a little, and you'll notice a couple of things here. So first off, when I move these up, since I'm moving the polygons, all the vertices and edges that are attached to them are also going to change location, right? The polygons don't move on their own. So instead of just going to every other, let's go to every third polygon like that. And we're gonna scale these out. And you'll see I use the scale from the center here just to scale in my X and Z axes. And already I've got a pretty interesting shape. I'm gonna select, let's say, this ring of edges, and then I'm going to convert my selection, or rather I'm going to select all three of these rings of edges, convert my selection to polygons with all three, and I'm going to scale that in a little, and then I'm going to scale it a little taller to make that center port kind of pop out like that. And now I pretty much have some kind of gear. I can of course select these edges. Actually, let's just do the top one for now. I'm gonna pull that up a little. And for the bottom here, since I have the extra edges, I'm going to flatten those out. Now, this will bring up an interesting point about the scale tool. If I was to go and scale this, you'll see that at some point it's going to invert, and that lower ring is going to go higher than the upper ring. And that might be what you want. If I look at this upside down, you can kind of see it's got this inset. But I really just want to flatten this completely, and I have a couple of options for doing that. The easiest is to just go into my side view and kind of look at it and eyeball it till it's kind of in one line. Again, we're not super concerned with accuracy here at this point, and that might be fine. If I look at this from here, it looks pretty flat. However, the scale tool, if I undo a little bit, the scale tool does have an option to stop you from scaling negatively, and that's found in the tool properties, which, if you'll remember from last week, is attached to the K key. So if I turn on my scale tool with the R key and then press K, you'll see it brings up the tool properties, and I have this option for negative scale that's turned on by default. If I turn that off, now when I click and drag on my green handlebar here, you'll see it reaches the center and then it doesn't pass any further no matter where I move my mouse. Okay, so that's going to give me precisely the center point from where those two edges are completely in line with each other. If I was to, let's say, add this internal ring here and wanted that entire section to be flat, I would do the same thing, but keep in mind that using the scale tool is going to move both those lower rings and the top ring. It's not going to move the lower ring to the top ring. It's going to find the center. So scale those together, and now all three of those are perfectly flat. So here's a kind of gotcha in terms of selecting these components in MODO. There is a little problem with them. If I am in a component mode, meaning vertex, edges, or polygons, and I was to move, let's say, all of the polygons, like that, I'm not telling the object, hey, this is the new location of your center. I'm telling the object that these polygons are up here, right? So what this means is if I go to quote-unquote item mode and I hit W, E, or R, the center of my object is going to be down here. So now I'm going to be rotating from here instead of the center of the geometry that I have. Now there is kind of a quick fix to this, which is to go to Edit, Center to Bounding Box, Center, and that will try to guesstimate where the center of your object should be. However, it's best practice to just not accidentally move the entire object in one of these modes. And so to do that, or to make sure you don't do that rather, you want to get used to hitting the 5 key on the keyboard. The 5 key is essentially going to put you in object mode. It's actually connected to that right there. It's one of the buttons underneath this button. So the 5 key will select the entire object versus 1, 2, and 3 will select vertexes, edges, and polygons. Just keep that in mind, because if you're not in object mode and then you move any of those components, it will definitely ruin the center of your object. The other thing to keep in mind here is that in MODO, for some odd reason, selecting nothing is the same as having everything selected. So let's say I am in edge mode and I click out here and I think, oh, I'm in object mode, and then I go to move it, it's going to move every single edge, right? Because I am still in edge mode, but it doesn't look like I have anything selected. So I would think that this is fine. I might, move it over here and scale it. And then when I hit 5 and I go to move, you'll see my move tool is still at the center of my scene, right? This problem becomes really bad when you're rotating. So let's actually do this in vertex mode. I'm going to rotate my object, right? Again, I'm in vertex mode and rotating the entire object, which is kind of a pretty big no-no. So let's say I wanted to have my object tilted like that. Now, if I try to rotate the object in object mode, so hit 5, select the object, and rotate, it's going to rotate like this instead of around my center. So let me go back and undo everything here. Right. If I was to select this object and rotate it like that and move it up, again, this time I'm doing it correctly in object mode after hitting the 5 key. Now if I was to rotate this, you'll see it rotates around the right place. So I'm going to undo this one more time just to have this object back in my center, and I'm gonna select these hips, and because my object's still symmetrical, there's only 2 polygons between those and they're still on one line, I can use the shift and up key to essentially do another pattern select on that. If I wanted to rotate these, you'll notice that they're kind of facing upwards. They're at an angle. If I wanted to rotate these, you'll see that they're rotating from the center of my object. And that's because of where our action center is. So our action center is essentially where the transform manipulator appears and the orientation that it's in. So it's the position and orientation of that action center. You can change it by clicking on this action center button and selecting one of these many options. You can select one of these top options, which is a combination of setting your orientation and your position, or you can select just the position, meaning the center, or just the orientation, which would be the axis here. We're just going to look at a couple of these that are useful. For example, the one I use the most often, other than the none default, is local, and local will move the transform manipulator to the center of one of your selections, and it will apply the same rotation or any transformation, rotation, position, or scaling to all the other parts of your selection. So you can actually see it's moved to like the middle of that polygon, and even the blue axis is kind of tilted to match that. So in this case, if I was to grab this red axis here and rotate that flat, and I'm kind of eyeballing it, but we could definitely look at this in one of the side views. This one's probably our best bet. So around there it looks right. And you'll notice that it affected all of them as best as it could. You'll notice this one on the side here is a little off for some reason. And sometimes that happens. You just have to go in and do that. And you'll notice I selected that polygon and I went to my rotate tool, and I'm still in local mode. So it's important to turn this off when you're done with it, okay? So here I'm just gonna eyeball this, flatten that out. The other fairly useful action center option here is called element, and I'm going to show you that on a new scene. So let's just hit Control W to close the scene. I'm not going to save it. Hold down Shift and click on my cube here. And I'm going to select this polygon, and I'm going to change my action center to element. And from here, I'm going to turn on my move, scale, or rotate tool. And you'll notice that if I select any of these elements, meaning an edge, a polygon, or a vertex, it's going to put my scale tool there. And now if I was to go to scale, let's scale from the middle, you'll notice it's scaling the selection to that point. If I was to select everything and then go to my, let's say, scale tool again and click on this vertex, scaling down will scale the object to that point or away from that point. Rotating will rotate. Oops, I selected the edge by mistake. So let's go to the rotate tool, and then you'll notice it highlights in this cyan blue. So I'm going to select that, and then clicking will let me rotate from that point, right? And this is only temporarily changing where I'm going to transform the object from. If I hit the space bar and hit 5 to go back into object mode, and then of course set my action center back to none, the action center is still the center of the object that was originally selected. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I was affecting the points, edges, and polygons there, so I was changing the entire object from that location, which again should be done in object mode. So if I was to undo that and do it again from scratch, so I have that cube in the center, I can just go to item mode and hitting the 5 key and then selecting element and select that element right there. Let me try that again. So rotate tool, I'm going to select that, scale it down, and you'll notice that if I go back to none, the center of my object is still here. So just keep that in mind. You have to be a little bit careful about those things when you're using the different action centers. Alright, so I want to do a quick example of something that you can model using some of the tools that we learned in this lesson, along with stuff from the last lesson. So I'm gonna new scene here, and let's show you how to bring a picture into MODO that you can use as reference. A Google search here, and let's just search for a lamp. We'll go to images, images, and we'll find something kind of simple for now. Let's go with this one right here. Okay, so I'm going to click on that image and try to get the highest resolution version of that image that I can. And just a quick side note, when we're looking for images to bring into the 3D program, we want to try to get an image like this where it's flat on from the side or the front. Even in angles like this might be usable, but you know, we don't want something kind of just like a regular photograph like this, because that's not going to be a great reference for us. Okay. So let's close this, let's go back here, we're going to save this image. I have a folder specifically for all the stuff I'm doing 3D in. You guys should definitely organize your files and have your, when we start saving, you want to make sure that your textures are saved in the same location as the scene files, because if you ever need to send me the assignments, or you need to, you know, send somebody just a current work in progress to be like, this is where I am, I need help with this, you want to be able to locate all those textures so that they can load up the scene with everything in place. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about image management and scene management as the semester goes on, and as we talk about the first assignment or first long-term assignment. So I'm just going to call this lamp and save it there, and back in MODO I'm going to load that image in. So I'm going to go to this items list and click the little arrow next to add item. I'm going to add in a backdrop item. That's going to give me this item with the icon of a little Mona Lisa picture, and it's going to select it, and you're going to see it looks just like a flat polygon in my scene. And if I go down to its properties, there's an option for transform, which is just my move, scale, rotate, and underneath that is the actual backdrop options, which has an image section here. So down here I'm going to select image, add clip, load image, and then select my lamp picture, and you'll notice that it's fairly large, which is okay because the scale is always going to be relative, but it's going to by default put it in facing my front view. Now one of the things I can do, because this object is symmetrical, or I'm assuming it's going to be symmetrical, I'm going to hit the Control D hotkey to duplicate that, and in the selection, or sorry, in the properties for the second object here, I'm just going to change my projection type from front to right, and you'll notice that lines up perfectly, right, because it's the same image, and it gives me kind of a reference to look at as I model. So we're just going to start modeling here. I'm going to do the front view, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Let's start with the bottom here. We're not going to worry about the textures for this or the holes or anything. We're just going to try to get the shapes first. So I'm going to throw in a sphere, and I'm going to bring that down to the bottom, scale it up from the middle. Remember, I'm scaling from the middle, not from this red blue circle here, because that will only scale in my X and Y. I want to scale in Z as well. I'm gonna just kind of get that around the right size, and you'll notice the bottom of this is supposed to be flat. So what we can do here is start using some of those tools that we have. So I can select, let's say, that vertex, shift and up to grow my selection, shift and up to grow it one more time, then go down to my scale tool, and I'm going to scale this down flat. Now you'll notice that this is remembering my option of scale negative, or negative scale is turned off. So if I hit K, you'll see that selection is turned off still. So that's going to flatten it, and then I can go back to my move tool and just raise that up. I can also see that it's not the right width, so I'm going to actually look at my top view here and use my scale tool with this green circle, but I'm going to watch down here for when these points reach that edge. So I'm going to scale it out from the middle until that's about right. You'll also notice that this picture is not perfectly center. Honestly, no picture really is, but it's close enough that we can continue working with it, right? Because like this is the center edge of that sphere, and then the center of the picture is over here. Now, if we wanted to, we can definitely go in and adjust that. So we can select this backdrop item, go to its transform properties, and just change the position. So in this case, we want to move this object over to the right in the x-axis. So slowly click and drag on this until that's lined up. We can also zoom in quite a bit, and we should be able to just use our move tool as well here. So just kind of line that up to there, and then we can grab our second backdrop item and line that up around there. Might need to have a little finer control, so I'll use these options on the side, something like that. Right now, again, for this lamp, not super important, but for other things we might need to get that level of precision. Okay, so let's rename this to the base, or lamp base, then throw in some other objects. We'll do the shade next, so we'll throw in a cylinder, and we will move this up around there, scale it up to be around that big, and then I'm going to grab this lower ring of edges by double clicking, and I'm going to scale that up as well until it reaches that edge. I'm just checking down here, and up here. You can also move this up slightly. And then for the top edge, we'll kind of do the same thing. We want to be a little bit careful with our selection, so grab that. And we'll scale in X and Z at the same time, up to there. Okay. Now, next we'll rename this, so lamp shade, and then we will add in a cylinder for that center portion. So this cylinder I could probably scale into the middle first, move that down, scale that up a little. Don't want to scale in X, I want to scale in X and Z together. So something like that. And we could scale this down. Now you'll notice there's another another cylinder down here, and our sphere is kind of overlapping that, so I'm just going to grab this top point of our sphere and move it down. Let's say there. Let's actually grab all of these points and scale them flat, and then move all of them down to there. Now here I'm just going to, instead of throwing in another sphere, I'm going to duplicate this one, or sorry, another cylinder. I'm going to duplicate this one and use my move tool to move it down. And you'll notice that at some point I did lose the center of that object, so I'm going to do that fix that we talked about earlier. I'll just go back to a left view, or front view rather. We're going to go to Edit, Center to Bounding Box Center, and I'm going to do that for this one as well. Edit, Center to Bounding Box Center. I'm going to grab this copy here and kind of flatten it down, move it down to where it belongs, flatten it some more, move it up, and then go back to my top view so I can scale that out to there. Now these objects could definitely overlap. You don't need to have them perfectly lined up with each other. So this cylinder can definitely go into that, and then this cylinder's lower edge, if I can grab it. So item mode, select the object, edge mode, select the edge, and just gonna kind of push that into the surface below it. Okay. I'm guessing this is part of the socket for the bulb, and so if if that's not going to be seen on your angle, based on your angle, you can definitely get away with it. But since it is there in like a lower angle, we can either throw in a shape to make it, let's say like a sphere. We probably just have it like that and get away with that. I can definitely go in and try to model the lamp socket, but you want to keep two things in mind. First of all, if you're not going to see it in the scene, you don't really need to model it unless there's some other functionality. Like I would want to model the center of this lampshade to have a hole, because I would assume that I would want light coming out from the top of it. The other thing is we're using these images as references, and so we don't have to match them perfectly. We can take some artistic liberties and just change it. So maybe I want to say that my lamp socket is actually up here, and I'm just going to grab this object and scale it up and let the kind of neck of the lamp go up into the shade. And honestly, at that point, we can say we're done. We can turn off the visibility for the backdrop items by clicking on those light icons, and then we can just go in and press the M key to assign some materials to this lamp. So this one I'll call base material, and oops, let me hit the M key again. A couple of things about this M tool. If I was to just change this here, it will still update. So let's go back to that image. It's kind of this off-white. Let's go to white and then a little bit more on the tan side. And you can definitely pick whichever color you want. I'm just trying to ballpark it. Hit OK, hit OK, and you could almost see that still looks the same. For the shade here, it's a little bit more on the orange side, so M, shade material, go grab that orange, lighten it quite a bit, and of course there's a lot more detail here, but we're not worried about that right now. Hit OK. Then for this part, I'm just going to call that the material, lamp arm material, and let's make that a gray. Alright. Okay everyone, so just a quick note, if you are having some issues with the layout or the just look of the program, one of the things you can do is double click on whichever layout you're looking at. So right now I'm in the MODO layout, and let's say I had accidentally clicked on something like this and my UI just looks very different than what I was expecting. I can double click on this and it's going to reset that layout. So if I hit OK, it's going to bring me back to something I'm more familiar with. Another thing I've been noticing a lot is sometimes I see a different kind of menu here outside of this one. So remember that there are tabs over here to kind of get to the primitive shapes. And also if you hit the 0 key, you're going to hide this kind of tool menu selection up here. So if I hit that again, it reveals itself, and we're looking mainly at the modeling menu here, or modeling toolbar. So you might be in one of these by mistake, just go back to this one, but if you don't have this menu at all, just mouse over this sidebar and press 0. So later this week, I'm going to post another video talking about some of the tools to actually add and remove edges, points, and polygons to our objects, so you don't have to be limited by the ones that are there when you first import your primitive shape. And then we're going to start discussing the first long-term project. To give you an overview of it right now, you're going to be modeling 5 different objects. You're going to model them and shade them and then put them together in a scene. And they all need to just be kind of the appropriate scale relative to each other and relative to your scene. So I'll show you examples from previous students, I'll show you examples I did, but start thinking of what you would want to make. A really common one is that people will just do like a dream bedroom with their bed, or like their desk with their computer and phone, mouse, and all those things. But you could definitely be creative with it. Start gathering reference images for things that you're interested in modeling. I would say for now, try to look for things that are more mechanical, no creatures, no humans, things that are kind of manufactured, as that will kind of help build a lot of your modeling skills. Because these tools were really, from the ground up, they were built to imitate stuff that exists in real life, and specifically things that are manufactured for things like 3D modeling and everything. So, try looking up for images of just stuff that you would be interested in trying to model. If you have any questions, of course, just throw them into chat. If you want to ask if like a model is feasible for a one-on-one student, then that's fine too. You can DM me, you can put in chat. If you're having any issues, with any parts of the things that we covered in the 2 videos, or any things with the installation, let me know. And I know a bunch of you haven't gotten the longer license, and hopefully you're on that 30-day trial still. I've heard that it can take up to 10 business days to get a license to you, so you should have ample time in that 30-day period until we're all set there. All right. Thanks again. I'll see you in a few days.